Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome to another episode of Fanalysis, Avatar The Last Airbender. I'm Callum, this is Matt,
Hello.
and this is Evan.
Hello.
Talking about which episode today, Matt?
This is Avatar: The Last Airbender, Book 3, Episode 7, The Runaway. This is the one where Toph scams a bunch of people out of their money, and Katara tries to guilt her about it because Katara is no fun. And then at the end, people learn their lessons and move on. Anyway,
filler about friendship, family, and gambling.
Yeah,
all at once.
Yeah.
This episode for me, I think, just as a general overlay or overview, is one of those ones that really suffers from the placement of it in the series. I can't really think of a better place to put it unless it was somewhere further at the end of Book 2. Mm-hmm. If they'd had more time with Toph by then, but because this is coming right in the midst of the last season and directly before so many great classic episodes of the show, it really kind of suffers from the fact that even though it's great by itself, it's not good enough, to warrant the attention that others have and garner it itself.
No, I was actually about to say almost exactly the same thing. Like, this really does feel like a really good book 2 episode filler. And it is enjoyable for that reason. But again, when you place it here, when the stakes have been raised to this point, and so much is coming later in the story, it just kind of feels like you're kind of just putting on the brakes for no reason. Even though there is genuinely a lot of good moments.
Yeah, it functions. It's just not anything to write home about. For the most part,
right.
With the exceptions of a few scenes that we're going to talk about in a bit.
Yeah, I don't really think that it's. My problem with it isn't that it's like filler or even its placement. I don't really have that much of a problem with it in general for like its content. For me, it's an episode that I think opens a couple of like really interesting windows. One of which gets explored in the Bloodbender episode, obviously, and then the other one, of course, has to do with Toph's parents. And I think that this is the last we ever hear of them.
Yeah.
Until for me. There's nothing wrong with it in the context of this episode, but I really do think that it feels more like that should have had like a better capstone that it ends up getting. Like, this is just kind of it. So to me, I guess I would just knock the season. It was writing as a whole there a little bit, as opposed to angling in on this exact episode or zeroing in on this exact episode, right? But that's sort of my feeling on it. As filler episodes go, this is not an offensive one. I think
absolutely not. No.
From the tone of what you guys were saying before, that was we're all on the same page there. But anyway, its actual content, I don't have that much to talk about.
We open with some
training. It is fairly straightforward.
Yeah, just standard kind of training scene between the gang, amusingly ending with the mud fight between Toph and Katara. I do like, again, it's an obvious and small note, but I do like the fact that they're both able to bend the mud because they're each controlling a different half of its makeup. I think it's just a cool little quirk between the two elements being bended.
Aspects of their skills, yeah.
And the way it gets used as well. The flowing,
which we've kind of already seen earlier, with like the the vine bending and stuff like that. So it is established.
Seen mud bending even already.
Yeah, mud, and that, yeah.
It's just a cool little note because that isn't really the case between fire and air, for example, obviously. So it's just a nice little happenstance of a thing that they get to play with. And again, leading into the scenes later on where it's telling you what water can do in a very like indicative way for what's happening later on in the season. They're playing with the ideas they want to utilize very nicely, even for the starting scene of the episode.
I mean, I don't think that we should be coy about the fact that they found an excuse to have two girls fighting in the mud. Like, that's what they were really planning on. Okay, but
something for everyone.
Yeah, as a just as a personal like little aside, like I don't have, like I said, this is not a personal favorite, right? Maybe I didn't say it. Wait, sorry, there was a cutoff, audience. I know that Callum has definitely edited that out, but just to explain my brain fog here, I can't remember what was said at the very beginning of this. But this has never been a personal favorite of mine, even though I like it, it's just not one of the strongest episodes of Avatar. But one thing I do remember is that like this is going back to like 2008. So, the economy sucks, like everything kind of sucks. And I remember my dad, he was like really kind of like just sort of miserable for a while there because he hated his job anyway. And he eventually ended up getting laid off from that job before he found like another one. So it was like just like this weird time. And I just remember my dad just being kind of like this kind of guy, but he's always like just like laughed his ass off at the whole Sokka's failed surprise attack. He always thought that was hilarious. So I have like kind of like a little warm memory of that. Yeah.
It's not a sneak attack if you announce it.
Yeah.
It's classic
yeah.
Sokka.
Yeah. So, that's kind of my favorite memory of this particular episode is right up front there. But anyway,
so they
then
go
we
into
get
the city.
into the actual crux of the episode here, which is just Toph's, scamming, using her earthbending and everything.
We said
which is interesting because I actually said this before we started, but it is interesting how the one game she gets roped into is like the only one she can actually successfully cheat at with her bending.
It's not just her bending, but with a lack of normative sight as well. It's just it's classically set up by the writers to be like, oh yeah, if only anyone else had been here, it wouldn't have worked, kind of thing.
But at the same time, though, like this is like a common, street hustle game, though. Like it's not like they really had to dig it way out of the ass or anything. It fit. It fit.
But it does kind of make you wonder, though, like if like obviously this is just street stuff, so they can do what they want. But it does kind of make you wonder, like in an official sense, are people who can bend like not allowed to gamble in this universe? Kind of like how people in Force Sensitives in Star Wars aren't allowed to gamble. Like it just kind of makes you wonder,
Yeah. I highly doubt that. If for no other reason,
like we get no indication that that's the case, of course. But I'm just saying, like it's just like in an official sense, like
it's one of those
things
or
something.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
They even have
to me
casinos in this universe.
I mean, they have gambling, so like whether they call it that or not. But I mean, it's one of those things where, let's say I'm an earthbender who's like even just half as skilled as Toph. If I'm gonna come into your establishment, what are you going to do to stop me? You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, it's, if you wanted to have like a rule like that, I don't, and also, unless all gambling was contingent upon like fire, air, and water somehow, like it wouldn't really apply to most, like Earth is kind of like the one that you can kind of get away with.
Just use a
metal
ball.
You could use like like wind to like like move a pair of dice or something.
Just have like a metal dice on a roulette table with a metal fixture on the floor, so they can't tilt it, and you're fine.
But also airbenders are all dead, and plus they're not really the gambling type anyway. So I doubt that there's like
be cheating
in the world. There's not really like I'm sure that there isn't like a rule against it, and again, hard to enforce.
It won't be a rule against it so much as there'll be like places specifically for non-benders if they had that thing. But again, it's just one of those quirky little world building things. But yeah, there'll be ways to get around it anyway for the most part until metal bending becomes a thing. But yeah, they have the scam montage effectively. They get the idea, or they get the idea from this first one, which Katara disapproves of for very good reasons. But also she's not
because she's a stick in the mud. She's not just
she's
a
right.
mud warrior. She's a stick in the mud. She is
right to play mother at this point.
Yeah, she's right until she's wrong in typical fashion. But
one of those cases
she's
where
right.
They both have a point, but it all just kind of comes down to interpretation.
Yeah, it's like Toph has a point on the personal note, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we need to go like beat by beat, scene by scene throughout this. We can just talk about like the meat of this episode, right? So like Katara's right about everything, but her, Toph is also right that Katara's like, she has no fun. She's acting like everybody's mom. And also like the annoying thing about her, she doesn't realize she's doing it or is in obvious denial of the fact.
Yeah.
And like to the point where she's going through Toph's stuff and lying about the fact that she did that. Like, which again, she's right, but she's also like, she crossed a little bit of a line there and also has the gall to lie about it. So like, but so anyway, but yeah,
it's Katara.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the wrong in that instance of that privacy, obviously, but it's again going back to the reason of her being the mum. It's just the lesson she kind of has to learn here is that yes, she is the mum, and that's not a bad thing, and that maybe accept that to more of a degree than she does, because clearly she's in denial about it from needing to lie, but also later on with the pivotal scene we talked about in a bit, she overhears that and then comes to the conclusion that she needs to stop being it, at least in so much of a way to create the bond with Toph. So, as with most things, Katara is just someone who really cares, and that she's conscientious about so many things, and that leads to mostly positive outcomes, but sometimes negative outcomes. One of which being, brushing up against Toph the wrong way on occasion, because Toph is a lot more carefree as a person.
Well, what is interesting about that is like even when they have the quote unquote fight and they kind of like separate for a bit and they sort of have to have their own little like realizations. I like the fact that they forgive each other and understand each other. Maybe like not easily, but it's like it's not something that they dwell on for like an absurd amount of time. It feels very realistic in the sense of like these are people who are smart enough to eventually understand where the other is coming from, and they're actually able to come to a consensus in a sense that doesn't feel like forced or played out, which, obviously, we have to consider the runtime of the episode. But again, I feel like if you were to do something like this in another show, it would be like a case of like, oh, they're fighting throughout the entire episode, and then like in the last 2 minutes is when they finally come back together and make up. But this way feels a lot more natural, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's not just the fact that they come back together again after Katara's overheard the chat with Sokka either. That's obviously the final bridge point, but that you can tell they're very quickly saddened more than they are angry at each other because of the disconnect, which shows you how good friends they are and how kind of self-aware they are about their own strengths and flaws, which is quite cool to see.
Because real people actually talk about their problems,
Exactly, yeah, and they've been on a journey together. Literally, they know that they need each other. They know that they all love each other. It's just a case of getting through this particular. It's like it's like roommate stuff, classic roommate stuff that just happens where you just fight over certain things if you're close enough, sibling rivalry, etc. You get to a certain degree of close with someone, you can start airing things out more easily, and that causes problems, but it also means they get solved faster as long as you're mature about it.
And we get during like the Sokka. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just gonna say, I think also the fact that like what Katara's biggest like point here is I don't even know that she voices it, but it's entirely needless. I mean, this is just Toph's bored, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's why she's so
and I would like to point out the fact that this further undermines the whole credibility of Sokka's schedule from back in Painted Lady, because they wasted a lot of time here doing absolutely nothing. He's had time to learn to be a swordsman. They've had time to learn the story of Roku, and now time for endless this. And they still wind up early, which is the whole reason why we get nightmares and daydreams. So fuck his schedule and fuck Painted Lady.
Once again, Painted Lady just fails on every conceivable level.
Yeah. But anyway, back to the funniest scene in this to me was the whole I guess it involves the whole hockey subplot thing, but it was really just the trading of the messages and the fact that he sent her a letter that obviously Toph can't write. So and then Aang being stupid enough to suggest, oh, well, let's send one to Toph. I think this is going to be a similar problem. It's like, why is the world in the hands of Aang? I know you're 12, but come on.
You're better
come
than
on,
that.
12's not that young.
Every joke in this show, or in this episode, is pretty much built on the fact that Toph's blind. Even just the one to post when it first comes up, it's like, what is wrong with you people? I'm blind. Like, just that. Yeah. That whole shtick is the kind of main point of comedy for this episode, which I like I know it's not really the intention, but on like an overall level, because as she's one of the focuses of the episode, it's good to have the humor wrapped around it as well, and the tension.
And I think it's worth mentioning, like, the impetus for like this initial fight was the fact that they found a wanted poster of Toph, sent obviously set up by her parents, and that's where the whole Runaway title of the episode comes from, because that's what they labeled her.
Surprisingly accurate in drawing as well. Sokka's like, oh, actually, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
I like that, because you look at it and think, God, that's terrible, but also, no, it's actually pretty good when you compare them. But yeah, obviously that's the main comedy beat, and the setup for the argument is the fact that they've found that, and that everything that Katara feared has come to pass, and that leads to the main scene that everyone remembers from this episode, which is the chat between Toph and Sokka, who we learn a little bit more about in this. We've not really had as much focus on Sokka's side of the situation with not having had the parents around. It's been mostly focused on Katara, as it will be later on as well. But it's nice to see both this in terms of playing out his side of it more, but also setting up the idea and reminding the audience that, this is a factor in their relationship and in the family dynamic between them, because it's going to be so critical later on in the book, with the particular episode where Katara takes focus. So I like the whole reason for this coming up when it does, and on top of that, it's just a really well written scene between the two. Sokka's
that's why I wouldn't,
got a lot to say here.
I wouldn't really.
Yeah,
that's why I don't really personally. Sorry, that's why I was gonna say I don't really class this episode as like filler. It's just like a lesser episode for me, because these things all carry through this book. So it's important stuff. If you take this out, the other things either aren't set up at all, or they're just more abrupt. And it is like we watched this back to back when we did Avatar and the Fire Lord, even though we're recording it a bit later, and it was funny to me how like they just set aside like time to like really tell like here's what the moral of this story is,
Yeah.
kids, you know, like, but it is a kid's show, you know, so you know, lest we forget, because sometimes it's easy to forget that when it's really like firing on all cylinders, but it is a kid's show. And it's a sweet, you know, tender little moment there. And it feels not, I mean, I don't want to say that it's not heavy-handed, but it's not annoyingly so.
Yeah,
you know?
it feels very rooted and human, even though it is clearly them trying to get this point across. Oh, look, Tara can overhear it. It doesn't feel like, it's not like one of those moments where you so often get with like the Lara reveal moments or the misunderstanding moments when someone hears half a conversation and rushes off in a fit. You know, this is clearly Katara's down there overhearing, but the focus is not on what she learns from the conversation. The focus is on what the audience learns of Sokka, and that new little tidbit of just, you know, she plays the mum so well and has done for so long in his life that he actively can't remember his mother's face. He just kind of sees Katara. That's a wonderful little tidbit into,
I think,
how he views his sister and how, you know.
I think that's also
it's really one of the few moments like in the entire series where we actually see Sokka like kind of, I wouldn't say like, you know, put on like become vulnerable, but at the same time, like he even opens with saying like, you know, this is not something I like to talk about. And you really do feel him. It's actually interesting. They do something really subtle here that I noticed is like there's a very noticeable change in his inflections when he talks about this story specifically. And you really get the sense of like, this is not something he would share with just anyone just right off the cusp. And it's really not something he likes to think about, because he often presents himself so much as being the one who's like, you know, stoic and happy and just, you know, going with the flow sort of thing. But he really does come off as like, yes, he does have this pain here, and it is something that he has carried with him in his entire life, and I really do appreciate that.
He's fully serious and he can't joke about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that that.
And you know, when he's not joking, he means it. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I also think that because I've heard that that kind of that idea expressed a lot in a lot of literary fiction, and especially even if it's just like fantasy, like that comes from like a medieval time, because I think most people did end up forgetting what their parents looked like, especially if they died young, because they didn't have photographs. So you know, it makes sense, and it's like a sobering thing for him to kind of admit to himself. So that's probably, of course, why he doesn't want to talk about it, especially to the point it can only sadden whoever hears it. You know, it's not like it's not a thing to dwell on.
Yeah. It kind of also shows that, like, you know, even though he talks about how their mother, you know, leaving them changed his sister, it also kind of makes you wonder, like, you know, how did he change as a result of that too? Like, what kind of person would he have been if that had never happened, and vice versa? You know, maybe it kind of makes you wonder, like, is a lot of his happy-go-lucky, lackadaisical personality, how much of that was the result of him trying to compensate for the sadness he feels for his, you know, his mother's, you know, departure and all that? And it just kind of makes you wonder, like, would he necessarily be the same person he is today if that had never happened, you know? Which, again, is something they explore later, again, with Katara in later episodes. But again, you know, that door for Sokka is also open there.
Well, yeah, because in that episode, she says something really wrong to him. So, but you know, it's kind of the groundwork's laid up to that, where she says something along the lines of that he didn't care about her the way she did, and he has to. I don't even know if he puts her back in her place or if he just kind of takes that. But either way, she's right out of line when she says that. But this really kind of, like I said, tease that up. You know, that moment when have the same kind of power without the setup here. But yeah, that is the heart and the meaning and the oomph behind this episode. The rest of it is like an action-filled romp where Katara, you know, she wants to like prove that she can be fun,
and
it backfires because this time they get caught and they're like, no, and then they throw them into a wooden cell, which, you know, sets up the whole sweat bending thing, like looking for water in weird places. And then you know, Sparky Boom Man, Combustion Man, whatever the fuck, like he shows up and
Sparky Boom.
No one cares about him.
This is where he gets his official name, by the way, in this episode.
He's such a, like, he's obviously he's a threatening presence. He's got enough of a threat, especially if you're a younger viewer. Just from the sake of his power and the way he implements it, and just his visual presence and everything. It's all very menacing. But yeah, he's one of those people that or aspects.
He has
of
no
Avatar,
personality.
Yeah, well, literally, yeah, by design. And you look back on Avatar, and he's never going to be the thing you think about. Like even in out of the top 10 things you think, he's not even going to enter into your mind. He's so forgettable, even despite the danger of his presence and the relative impact of his appearance throughout this season. He's just kind of there to be the
he had a cool ability, and he's an obstacle. He's just a walking obstacle.
Exactly.
That's
it's just a cat on their heels as they're running away because they can't currently have Azula or Zuko at the moment. So it's just that basically. And as a result, for most of the action, aside from visual spectacle, just doesn't really track from him. I was like, I don't care.
The only thing,
gang escaping.
Aside from his ability, the only thing interesting about the way he figures into the plot is he's pretty much like the final straw that prevents them from just accepting Zuko when he does show up, when they realize that he's the one who hired him. That's literally it as far as a narrative point goes. That's the only interesting wrench he throws into it. Yeah.
And it's not even so much as a criticism of the show. I'm not saying that he should have had more done with him, because they didn't really have the time to spend on him.
It's just the reason why we're talking about him the way we are.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. It's just the fact.
Yeah, exactly.
He's not that depthful of a character.
Yeah, it's just the way he is, and it's the way he was supposed to be, etc. It's just as a result, you can't quite enjoy the elements that he is connected to as much as you would other ones if there'd been other characters at stake and in the picture. Azula, Zuko, etc. But we'll get there. We definitely get there by the end of the book.
Yeah.
Or about midway through the book.
Yeah, I mean, a villain doesn't necessarily have to we don't have to know everything about them in order to be.
No, I don't want to know everything about them.
But that's just that's what I'm saying. It's you can have villains that are just kind of straightforward, but at the same time, he's just so, again, like you said, forgettable that it's, again, if you just took away his abilities, would anyone remember this guy? I doubt it.
Yeah. I mean, just think about it in terms of he's a good firebender. Not that he's got a unique ability that's absolutely terrifying to think about. Just he's a good firebender, and he would be utterly useless as a figure in the story. So it's at least they understood they needed to give him something to stand out if they weren't going to give him proper story development.
Which it does kind of make you wonder why the Fire Nation didn't recruit this guy into the actual military, but whatever.
I don't know. I feel like
he'd be pretty useful.
He doesn't strike me as a patriot. He strikes me very much as a for hire guy, which you probably don't want around. But yeah, just that's the end of the episode. They fight. Well, they flee him successfully. They get some good moves, and I do like the creative bending with the flick on the head and the ice blast that they use against us at different times. So that was very cool.
It's all good.
Which you kind of wonder why that didn't kill him. You think he'd suffocate pretty immediately.
Oh,
whatever.
Well, because Avatar.
Knowing how Korra goes later on, and it's the whole head encased thing is funny. But yeah, we'll talk about that later on. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. Looking at
well, he blow his way out of this one, or did he smash it? I think he smashed it with his arm. Isn't his arm metal? Am I making that up?
Arm and legs,
okay.
At least encased in metal, if not.
He obviously blew himself to pieces once, and he's been repaired. But and then like I said, we kind of already talked about it, but it's just kind of like this nice little moment where Katara is asked to help Toph with a letter to her folks, but then we never bring that up again. And it's not a tremendous downfall of the series or anything, but it would have been probably nice to wrap that up with a nicer bow around the finale time.
Particularly because we do see them in
they have the excuse
at the end. They are together.
They have the excuse of being able to teleport anywhere because they're so rich, and influential.
Exactly.
So they easily could have showed up at some point, easily, to give them a better send off. But it's not that bad of it. And considering the send off that Zuko's mom gets, that's not even highest on my list of priorities of what I would fix. But anyway, because it's not perfect. It's amazing, but it's not perfect.
Exactly. But
anyway,
that's this episode in a nutshell. Amazing, but not perfect. And those are our thoughts, guys. I'm looking forward more in particular to the next following run because we've got a good set of episodes after this point.
Yes.
Big stuff's
the Puppet
coming.
Master. Looking forward to that one.
Anyway, we shall see you for that one. I am Cal, and I still don't have an outro.
Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.
Airbender 95. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
Goodbye.